Hello everyone, and welcome to the One Night at Flumpty's 2 developer commentary. I have a lot of things that I want to say, and I don't know how to get through it all, but I'm going to start by saying that whenever I made the first One Night at Flumpty's, I really just made it as a joke. I didn't try to make it super original, I didn't expect it to get the following that it did. It was just me parodying Five Nights at Freddy's with a character that I made up with my friends a year ago, and apparently people enjoyed the first game enough to want a sequel, and so I started thinking about one. But one problem that I had with One Night at Flumpty's personally was I didn't really feel like it was original enough. It was too derivative of Five Nights at Freddy's. So I thought if I was going to make a sequel, I wanted to make it something new, something fresh that hopefully people haven't seen before or played before. And I didn't really have many ideas. The only idea that I had at the time was the idea of replacing the phone call and the fan in the background of Five Nights at Freddy's with a record player that plays music. And I liked that idea, and I wanted to use it, but I didn't have anything else to really go on. Until one night, not at Flumpty's, but at a relative's house that I wasn't really used to staying in, I couldn't really sleep very well, and whenever I finally did get to sleep, I only slept about an hour, because I had a nightmare. In the nightmare, I was in a sort of garage-type place, and there was a light switch in front of me that turned the lights in the garage on and off. But then there was also a hallway in front of me that sometimes monsters of some variety, I don't know what they looked like because I don't remember, but sometimes monsters would come by and they would look into the room, and if the light was off then they wouldn't see me. But one time I had the light on and one of them just charged at me and I woke up abruptly, and I thought, well, I guess that must be a One Night at Flumpty's 2 dream, because I can't imagine what else that would be. And I just took it as a sign that apparently One Night at Flumpty's 2 has to exist. So I started drawing the quote-unquote office of the game. The office alone took about a week to draw, and I called upon my friend Jake, or MetroidMan347, one more time to tell me what kind of random crap that I should draw in the room, and I came up with a lot of ideas myself this time for things to draw, but a lot of it still came from him. Which reminds me, in the first game there was the cactus that I made blue because, aside from a few exceptions, I decided to try to avoid green as much as possible in the first game. In this game I avoided the color blue, and I have a blue whale that I intentionally made green, just because. But yeah, I drew the room, and it is very similar to how it looked in my dream, and then I decided to add vents to it because Taste Gaming made a video on the first One Night at Flumpty's, and he had the suggestion that maybe the beaver in that game, who works like Foxy, it might be cool if he came from either door, the left one or the right one, in the game, instead of just always coming down the same hallway. And I decided to incorporate that idea into One Night at Flumpty's 2 with the vents and the owl, and I really think that was a good idea, and I thank him for that. Go check him out, he's a very jolly guy. But then, at around this time, I kind of lost some steam with the project because I played Five Nights at Freddy's 2 for the first time, and it made me realize that the ideas that I'd been coming up with for the game weren't really original enough, and perhaps weren't intuitive enough either. The initial ideas that I had for this game were for the characters to just kill you on the spot if they saw you and your light wasn't off. And I also thought about having Grunkfist the Clown just be another wind-up music box thing, but that idea's been kind of done to death in fan games at this point, and I also don't really like that mechanic to begin with anyways, because I feel like there's too much maintenance with it. You have to worry about it every single second. I didn't know what to do, so I took a break, and I had another inspiring dream. This time it was a Super Mario Sunshine 2 dream, for some reason. And in the dream, anytime Mario was seen by an enemy, there was a bar in the bottom right corner that increased, and whenever it reached full, all the enemies started attacking him. Just kind of think like all the enemies attacking him like the cuckoos in Ocarina of Time attack Link. So I wake up from the dream, I think that was weird, and then about 7 or 8 hours pass, and I think, wait a minute, I can use that idea! And so that's how the exposure meter got into the game, and it's in the same place that it was in my dream. And I felt like just incorporating that added this new realm of possibility to the game. Another thing about Freddy's 2 that I don't care as much about is how much of the game is based on quick reflexes. because in the later nights, if you make a split-second error, then you're dead. And I felt like the exposure meter kind of prevented that from happening with my game, and that's one thing I liked about it. One thing that I love in the first Five Nights at Freddy's is the power mechanic, because everything that you do affects the power, and at the end of the night it's so much more tense than the beginning because you have almost no power left. And I really like that feeling of tension, and I felt like the exposure bar and how it can never go down kind of helped to bring that feeling of tension back that I kind of missed from the second game, and to an extent the third one as well. One thing that I deeply appreciate about the first Five Nights at Freddy's that isn't so present in the second one is how every character is unique in how they function in the game. You can kind of develop this weird relationship with each one of them individually because they all behave differently, but in the second game there's less of that because more of them behave the same way. So that's kind of a rule that I set up for myself, is I wanted every character to be uniquely distinguishable by the way they behave. One of the common complaints with Five Nights at Freddy's and its fan games is that the camera doesn't really have enough of a use. I wanted to change that with my game. I sort of tried that with the first game, but I didn't really put the same effort into it as I did this one. And so the owl is one reason to look at the cameras. Grunkfist the Clown, I decided to have a timer that you had to pay attention to for him. Then I also added the Red Man pop-up. I thought that that was kind of a fun idea. And as for other characters like Blam and the Eyesore, it's helpful to look at the cameras for those characters because you can just turn off the light really fast if they're coming, but if you know that they're coming, then you don't have to waste any exposure at all. So I guess for posterity, I can try to explain how all the characters work in detail. Flumpty starts moving almost right away, but he doesn't actually have a chance of entering your room for the first, I think, 30 seconds. Like in the first game, every time he moves, it's to a completely random location, and he has, I think, a 15% chance of entering your room. And I knew that if I was going to have Flumpty be completely random in this game, I needed to have some kind of delay before he makes your exposure go up, and so I added a peekaboo animation that I hope is quick enough to be startling, but slow enough that you can respond to it without raging at the game. The owl is also active almost right away, partly so that you can learn how the owl works, and also because if the owl wasn't active almost right away, then there wouldn't be a reason to ever turn the lights on, so I felt like that was important. The owl will stay in camera 3. If you don't see him in camera 3 anymore, then he's in one of the two vents in camera 4 or 5, and whichever one he's going down, you close that vent in the room. He's a little bit more likely to go to the vent that is open than the one that is closed, but he can go through either at any time. If you happen to look at the camera that the owl isn't going through, then you can just close that vent and you're given extra time before the owl hits the vent. Birthday Boy Blam becomes active around 1 o'clock, and he makes a constant cycle around camera 6, camera 3, and camera 7, and then he enters the room again. He just makes a circle, and if you see him in his Kevin Jr. fancy attire in camera 7, then that means he's about to enter the room. If you see him disappear from that screen, then you have a really short span of time before he actually enters the room and sees you, so you can turn off the light in that time. And you shouldn't ever have to do this, but you can turn the light on if he's starting to walk away, because he's not looking at you anymore. When you see the hole appear on the left side of the room, that means that Grunkfist is starting to lose his patience. You can see what his patience level is in camera 2. The moment it hits 0, he will pop out of the hole in the wall on the left, and your exposure will go up faster than it will for Flumpty or Blam because he's closer to you, so it's more easy for him to be aware that you're there. And because the game runs at 30 frames per second, which is a choice that I made because it made the game run faster, the timer also goes down 30 every second, so that might help you keep a mental note of how fast it's going down. Redman.exe, just a pop-up, click cancel when it appears. If you don't, then you'll have a few seconds to see a red screen of death, and then he'll kill you. I programmed the pop-up where it shouldn't ever appear whenever it's impossible to click cancel. You should always have time to react to it before any of the characters look at you in the room. The Eyesore, kind of and kind of not a character returning from the first game. He will stay in camera 1, but if you see him crawling out of the hole in camera 1, then that means he will start coming towards you in the next minute or two. Then he will move to camera 3, and then camera 6, and then to your room, in a relatively rapid fashion. So you want to make sure that if you see him in either of those cameras, he will be at the room in about 20 seconds or less. In the normal mode, he'll only appear once, sometime after 4 AM, but in hard-boiled mode he's much more active. And then the last character is Golden Flumpty. He starts having a reasonable chance of showing up after 4:30 or so, and if you look at him for too long without either turning off the light or flipping up the laptop screen, then he will kill you, kind of like Golden Freddy does. There are a few recurring questions that I have seen with the characters, like, why doesn't the eyesore move around in the first game? And that's because whenever I made the first game, the pile of eyes in the floor in that one room, it's just a pile of eyes. That's how I drew it. It wasn't intended to be a character. But then people thought it was a character, and I thought maybe I could turn it into a character. And it took me a while to come up with a design to match those eyes, because everything that I came up with was just kind of like that monster in Monty Python and the Holy Grail that has a whole bunch of eyes. But then I thought of the idea that I once had, where the eyes represent people that Flumpty has killed in his game of bringing people into his house and having them survive the night. So I had the terrifying idea of just making the eyes a beast of corpses, and I made it a dinosaur because I liked the pun eyesore. The eyesore character is elaborated on a little bit in the newspaper that you get after hard-boiled mode. And another big question is, where did the beaver go? Because the beaver is the only character in the first game who doesn't reappear in the second one. I just really wanted the eyesore to be a character, and I valued the balance of the game's mechanics over total consistency between the games. So whenever I brought eyesore into the game as a character that moves around, and whenever I replaced the beaver with an owl because owls can see in the dark, and that made sense with the whole turning off the light mechanic, I didn't really have room to put the beaver in the game and have it still make the game feel nice. So I have an Easter egg in the game that shows up rarely if you start it up, where you just see a gravestone that says the beaver is dead because he fell down the toilet. I just knew people were going to ask about the beaver, so I had to come up with some kind of explanation for why he's not there, and that is the explanation that I came up with, as stupid as it is. In addition to the beaver, there was actually another character that I scrapped for the game, who was a blind character. I just thought about having a blind character wander from camera 1, eventually reaching your room, and then just kind of wandering past it. And the idea was that if you didn't make any noise, then he wouldn't notice you. But I ditched that idea because sound doesn't really play nearly as huge of a role as the light does, and it would really slow down the gameplay to just not do anything as he passes by, and I might recycle the idea of a blind monster into another game someday. Maybe not a Five Nights at Freddy's fan game, but just a game sometime, because not that I'm the first one to come up with the idea of a blind monster, I just think it would be cool to try and see if I could use that sometime. As far as hard-boiled mode goes, I didn't think that if I was going to make a sequel to One Night at Flumpty's that I was going to have 2 nights, because it just kind of feels weird to have a second night if the whole idea is that it's one night. But I guess whenever I made this game and I felt like it wasn't something that people had played before, I wanted to see what people would do with a hard mode. Like, if I made a hard-boiled mode of the first One Night at Flumpty's, which I won't, I don't know what would make it any different from Night 6 or Night 7 of Five Nights at Freddy's, but this actually felt different to me. And so I was happy to make a hard-boiled mode, also just to see how I enjoyed it myself, and how much trouble I would have with it. And it was kind of crazy to me because I programmed the whole game not really actually playing it until it was almost done. I just tested bits and pieces of it along the way, but until the end, it didn't all come together and I didn't actually play it for myself. I was impressed with how it turned out. I didn't expect it to be as tense as it is, and I feel like I must have gotten lucky with it, because one of the hardest things for me to do is make a game that I still want to play after I've spent a long time working on it. But I got addicted to hard-boiled mode and tweaking parts of it to make sure that it was possible. I promised myself that unless I beat hard-boiled mode myself, I wouldn't release the game, and so it took me about 3 hours, but I did it. The recording you're seeing now is my second time beating it. People have a strategy where they just keep the lights off as much as possible and only really pay attention to the owl and the red man pop-up, and maybe also Grunkfist the Clown. And I guess that's a strategy that works. I don't think it's 100% reliable. I prefer to play the game paying attention to all the enemies at once, but, you know, play it however you think works. I kind of think of One Night at Flumpty's 1 as a parody game, and I see this one also as sort of a parody, but more as a tribute. Because I admire Scott Cawthon's work with Five Nights at Freddy's so much, just because of their game mechanics and how they're different every time. I like the story of the games too, but it's not really the biggest appeal to me compared to the game mechanics, and that's probably part of the reason why I didn't really focus on the story as much in making One Night at Flumpty's. But making this game was kind of my way of saying, this is what I feel like I've learned from playing Five Nights at Freddy's and being inspired by the games. Whereas the first One Night at Flumpty's was more or less a joke, I really poured myself into this one and I took it seriously as a project. To kind of cap it all off, whenever I had the record player idea, I knew that I wanted just light, happy classical music to be playing in the background as something that shouldn't be creepy, but it is. And I just kind of made this mock-up classical music that's not a reference to anything in particular. But then for hard-boiled mode, I had the idea to remake the Toreador March, or the Toreador song, which is a tune from an opera, but it's also the tune that plays when Freddy appears at the door in Five Nights at Freddy's 1. And it was so much fun to remake it in a classical-ish style. So that's another homage to Scott Cawthon's genius. For the people who have asked, I made the artwork in these games with Flash 8. That's kind of my art program of choice, and animation program. The game itself is made with Game Maker Studio, mostly using GML, not so much drag and drop stuff. And I'm not sure that anyone's asked this, but the music in both games was all made in FL Studio. So, I'm very happy with how this game turned out. It turned out better than I expected. I'm hesitant to say that I'm proud, because while I can practically credit the whole creative process of the game to myself, there's still so many people that I have to thank, because without them this game would not exist. I want to thank www.wario for making Five Nights at Wario's, because the moment I saw that, I was inspired to make One Night at Flumpty's, because I realized that it would be fun to make, and if Five Nights at Wario's exist, then why not Flumpty's? Both of those are kind of equally absurd concepts, although I don't mean that in a bad way, I just think it's fun. And I also just think that www.wario, or Andy, is a very nice guy, and he was supportive of One Night at Flumpty's too, and so I had to thank him both in the special thanks in the menu of the game, and also I decided to draw his morphed Five Nights at Wario's Luigi in the background of one of my One Night at Flumpty's 2 rooms. Again, taste gaming without his spur-of-the-moment idea to have a Foxy mechanic with 2 hallways. Without that, this game probably wouldn't exist either. I have Dawko to thank for being supportive. I have Dalek Puncher to thank for the Red Man scream. I brought up on Twitter that I didn't have any jump scare screams for One Night at Flumpty's 2 yet, and I wanted there to be multiple ones. I didn't want them to all sound the same this time. And Dalek Puncher gave me a sound that I had to edit a little bit, but it worked perfectly. So, big props to him for that. That was really helpful. I have my friends to thank, like Jake, for the assistance of the creation of Flumpty Bumpty, and he was helpful in the beta testing process, even though this game didn't have much of a beta testing process. And again, just Scott Cawthon, he's inspired me in ways that I would have never thought possible, from a game in a genre that I used to not even really care for. He's a truly amazing guy, and I wish him the best. As a side note, people have asked here and there to see the comic that I made with my friends where Flumpty Bumpty and Birthday Boy Blam originated, but a lot of that comic was lost a while back, and I don't think it's retrievable, so I'm sorry about that. I don't even remember how Flumpty and Blam met. It had nothing to do with Five Nights at Freddy's, I can tell you that much. Now, one more big question that's on people's minds is, will there be a One Night at Flumpty's 3? I can't entirely dismiss the possibility of one, but I don't think I'll make one. It's just that this one took a lot out of me, and I feel like everything that I really wanted to do with the first One Night at Flumpty's that I didn't, I ended up doing with the second one. The response that this one has gotten has been unreal. It's the top-rated game, or top-rated Five Nights at Freddy's game on GameJolt right now, which is a huge honor. And it feels like if I made another one, then it would only go downhill from here, and I don't think I would have as much fun making it either. I don't want to feel like I'm obligated to make a third One Night at Flumpty's just because there are 3 Five Nights at Freddy's games. And if there's a 4th Five Nights at Freddy's game somewhere in the future, then would I have to make a 4th One Night at Flumpty's? I just want to be able to work on original projects. Because after all, Five Nights at Freddy's was an original project. That wasn't a fan game of anything. Scott made that on his own merit, and I like making fan games, but I want to focus on projects that aren't fan games. So, I guess we'll see how that works out. Anyways, say what you will about Five Nights at Freddy's, but the community surrounding the series is one of the most amazing groups of people I've ever known, and I am incredibly grateful for the opportunities that I've been given to have so much fun making these fan games and to see people enjoy them the way that they do. It's really been a wild ride. So thank you all very much for watching and playing, and I will see you in whatever we do next.